All right, good evening, everyone. Can everybody hear me all right? Perfect. My name is Daniel Baer. I'm an event facilitator here with Guy Robinson Booksellers. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory and that the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Aninawak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and the Dene people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. And we are, of course, gathered here today to celebrate the return of our dear friend, Guy Gavriel Kay. And to discuss his brilliant new book, Written on the Dark. And we're incredibly grateful to Viking Canada for publishing this book and helping make this evening a reality. And of course, to Bruce Symaka for hosting today. You've probably heard before, but for those who are just joining us, following a reading and a conversation with our guest tonight, we do have questions still. But instead of passing the microphone around for those, we have a question box over here to my right. We still have some slips here if you would like to fill a question out. But towards the end of the presentation, we're going to bring those over to Guy just to read those questions out loud and have them answered for you. And now I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's participants. For many years, your host, Bruce Symaka, worked at the Winnipeg International Writers Festival and other bookish places. Now, his reading time is entirely his own. And our special guest this evening, Guy Gavriel Kay, is the international best-selling author of 15 previous novels, including the Fiona of Our Tapestry series, Tigana, The Last Light of the Sun, Under Heaven, River of Stars, Children of Earth and Sky, and A Brightness Long Ago. He has been awarded the International Gallardos? Thank you, prize for his work in the literature of the fantastic, and won the World Fantasy Award for Isabel in 2008. In 2014, he was named to the Order of Canada, the country's highest civilian honor. His works have been translated into many languages, 30 languages. So please join me in welcoming Guy Gavriel Kay.
The hardest thing to do is navigate here by way of microphones. This morning, at an unfairly early hour, having not had enough intravenous coffee, I was on CTV, and the very lovely interviewer said, "You've been very prolific." And I said, "I'm not prolific, I'm old." And I like making jokes. I enjoy when people are having a good time and they laugh. But I also wanted to begin with that because there's a point to make in that context, and it has to do with expressing gratitude. So first of all, let me thank McNally Robinson and the team here for bringing me back. This store, as some of you will know, is pretty much a homebound for me. I went to high school in Grant Park, just at the other end of the mall. I skipped classes in that mall, which I think you know. Coming back here, quite honestly, can make me feel a little sentimental. Don't tell anyone that. I'm a hard-edged Winnipeg car merchant, so I don't get sentimental. So thank you to McNally's. Thank you to Bruce for agreeing to sit down and chat again. It's always a pleasure talking to him. And thank you to Penguin Canada for setting up, arranging, coordinating my travels this spring with the release of Written on the Dark. But remember, I said that I'm old thing is a leading to something serious. Over the last little while, starting with in May, I did a 12-day tour in France for my French publishers, and started to become more aware than ever of how lucky I've been in my readers. How lucky I've been to be allowed to be old and still writing books, publishing books, having them reprinted, translated. That is, I cannot tell you, that is such a gift that comes to me from you, from readers all over the world. And I say this in the context of something you may not be fully aware of, which is how extraordinarily difficult and challenging the book world is for most writers today. For people I know, some of them well, who published their first books around when I published my first books. For young writers I've come to know who ask me for advice, guidance, the challenges of surviving as a writer today. If you're serious about what you do, if you're ambitious in what you do, are extraordinary. And it's against that backdrop that since that tour in France a month ago, that I've started to do interviews, have conversations about Written on the Dark. A feeling of genuine gratitude infuses me right now that the fact that I've been able to do this for 40 years now, God help us all, that Guianavar, my first trilogy, came out in 1984. So it's actually more than 40 years that I've been publishing fiction. And that's all I do. That's the gift that I'm given by my readers, that there's enough of you here, the United States, England, around the world. There's enough people who seem to want to read, talk about, share, be engaged by what I do, that allows me to keep doing it in a climate where that is increasingly rare. Not only keep doing it, but do it the way I want, write the books I want to write, and at the pace, the speed that they seem to want to be written at, not be rushed. I've never had an editor or an agent say, pick it up, kid. They'd be dead, because that's a whole thing. This is very much embedded in my thinking this spring as Written on the Dark comes out. So if I say how much I appreciate you, it's not the pro forma, thanks everybody for coming out, for turning up. It's a very deep-seated awareness that you've given me something over the years that has allowed me to keep pursuing what I want to do, which is tell stories, write books, engage people, keep you awake till 3 in the morning if I can, the underlying sadism of the writing, the psychology. So seriously, thank you. So, Written on the Dark. I rarely know the origin of books precisely because too many different things are percolating at a given time that come together to shape the idea for a novel. But in this case, 2 things happened. One was that I learned about and then learned more about and then became fascinated by the assassination of the most powerful man in France, in Paris, during the 100 Years' War. The brother of the king, because the king was essentially routinely mad. His brother was running the country with the queen. And this man was killed in Paris. And someone, I'm not going to spoil things, someone was tasked with finding out who did it. And then, and this is something I love, the way in which history infuses the present. And then the thinking, characters, the story started to pick up on something that's really important to him, which is, can people be so powerful, so wealthy, so powerful, so influential, that they cannot be brought to justice? They cannot safely be brought to justice, or even that it might not be wise to bring them to justice because the country is in the middle of the civil war and external invasion, and maybe the last thing we need is that kind of upheaval. Now, my characters come to their conclusions. I hope you'll read the book and find out what they are. But this idea of power and justice and how they don't sit easily together was in this novel from the very start. And it picks up on a phrase I've been quoting a lot, which is that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. It was not said by Mark Twain. Not everything was said by Mark Twain. Nor Oscar Wilde. There were other people who said it. Theodore Rankford, the name of the person who said it, he was a psychoanalyst. And what I've taken away from that, especially given the way I write with that quarter turn to the fantastic from straight history, is I'm rhyming with history when I write my books. I'm giving you rhymes with events of the past and hoping that they resonate as to the present. That's what I've been doing. The one other thing I'll mention about the background is that I had always known about, but then when I started researching, I learned a lot more about an extraordinary French poet of that same period, the 100 Years' War, named Francois Villon. And he wrote scurrilous, obscene sometimes, funny as all hell, tethered poetry. He was a bar poet. He hung out in bars and recited, ad-libbed, improvised poems for beer or wine. There are people around now who do that. Slam poetry is about that. And the amazing thing about Francois Villon, there are many amazing things, but one of them is we lose him to history really young. He was known, he was well known, he was charged with robbery, he was accused of murder, he was exiled from Paris. We know all of this stuff while he's young. And then he's gone. He's gone. He leaves behind one of the best known literary legacies of that late medieval, early Renaissance time. And damn, that was interesting. That was not only interesting, it was an opportunity. I can do things with all of that. So those are two of the origin points for the book. Now, I tend to read, and some of you, I see faces I've seen here before, so you can't help yourselves, can you? The recidivists. You know that I like to read from early in the book, because if you read from too far into the book, you run the risk of spoilers. And you run another risk, which is the need to give a 10-minute explanation of who everyone is and what their motivation is. And by the time you start reading, some people are asleep. And because I've been doing this for a long time, I've realized that that's counterproductive. So I tend to read them very early. This passage takes place, not the very first pages, because I wanted to introduce you to a woman who is one of the other central protagonists. What's happened and all you need to know, it is savagely cold. I'm aware that Winnipeggers don't really understand anything about that. It's savagely cold winter night in the city of Oran, which is essentially my Paris. The tavern poet, Thierry Villard, has gotten up in the middle of that savagely cold night, 3 a.m, and gotten dressed, swearing nonstop, and gone outside. He's going outside because he's going to participate in a robbery, he thinks. I'm not reading that first few pages, but the next passage involves one of his dearest friends also sleeping in the tavern where he's been sleeping, and she hears sounds outside. It's the middle of the night. Sylvie was a restless sleeper and thought she heard a jingling sound outside. Then she heard the bells, and then that same sound again after the third one. She got out of bed and crossed to the window, 2 pairs of heavy stockings on her feet, stood there and looked down. Eudes, who was good with tools, had contrived a way to hinge the shutters on this 3rd floor, so a part could be folded back on either side. There was no light. No one could see her, the watcher, the witness. Behind her, Annie and Eudes slept, Annie snoring softly as she usually did. The cold was appalling, but she knew the bed would be warm when she went back. There were horsemen in the street. She saw them when Thierry came out and torches were lit. She was very afraid then, and there was nothing at all she could do. She was so angry with him. Nothing to do about that either. Should she have told him not to go? Would it have done any good? Did he ever listen? Maybe sometimes, once or twice. Words were being exchanged below. From the way he stood, she knew Thierry was frightened. He'd be thinking of running. He'd know there was no way he could. He stood where he was and spoke to the men on horses, to one of them. Then, after more words, Sylvie at her window saw him mount up with assistance on a horse. It was entirely unexpected. She'd never seen him on a horse. She'd never been on one either, had dreams of riding sometimes, galloping on a vast plain under both moons, going nowhere that she knew in the world, but going there very fast. She watched the riders disappear up the street towards the river. A dozen or so men, 3 torches, her friend, inexplicably among them. She wondered if she'd ever see him again. She didn't know who these men were. They had evidently been waiting for him at this impossible hour, for no reason she could even imagine. Then the street was empty again and black. Nothing to see. You could almost imagine you had dreamed the whole encounter. Anger and fear wouldn't shelter you from this cold. Sylvie went back to the bed, which was indeed warm with two bodies. She didn't sleep, was tangled too much in questions. She had no idea what was happening outside tonight with Terry. She wished, even though she knew it was embedded heresy, that she had more of her mother's gift of the sight. She slept eventually. When she woke again, dawn was breaking on what would prove a traumatic and terrible day. This is a short space. The winter would not last forever, even if it felt that way at times. Winters never did. And this frigid savagery was not a marker of how soon or late spring would arrive, with the ice in the river melting, buds on the trees of Oran, rainfall, flowers springing up, shops and their wares spilling into the streets again. The city was harder to love in the dead of winter, easier when spring came, very easy, in fact. It was a glory of the world around. Fewer people than it had held before the worst years of the plague, which was why there were places with young trees and open meadows within the walls, but it was growing again. The sounds of construction would begin all over at first light, even in the cold. Shops and homes being built. Some neighborhoods, they were the same thing. But also new sanctuaries and great tall city mansions for the wealthy who needed to be in Oran because the mad king's court was still here. Not everyone alive in that winter night and the following day when chaos erupted would live to see the flowers return, or the warmth of summer, or enjoy the fruits of the harvest that followed. But that is always so. Men and women live with a heart-deep uncertainty every morning when they wake. It is why they go to war, why they write poems, fall in and out of love, plan thefts on dark nights, or try to forestall them, why they pray or refuse to pray. It is the uncertainty that shapes and defines our lives, the tears of the world, a longing for joy, or even just safety, just that.
There we go. Thank you. Let's do that. I was saying earlier that I had made a mistake in New York several years ago because I was in a museum, the Frick collection, and I bought this huge hardcover art book about called Splendor of the Burgundian Court. Beautiful book, and then I had to get it home because it's really heavy. Glossy pages and huge. And so when I got an email from John Taves asking me to host tonight, and I thought, well, certainly. I mean, I love reading Guy's books, and that was an easy thing to do. And then when I got a copy of the book and I realized it was about medieval France and the courts of Burgundy, with the court of Burgundy. I thought, this is fabulous because I love this era. This is so good. But as you know, if you've read Guy's books, even though I mentioned the court of Burgundy in medieval France, this book does not take place in medieval France. The Duke of Burgundy is not a character. The King of France is not a character because it takes place in another, as you said, a quarter turn or a rhyme with history. Guy, why not write about the Duke of John the Fearless, who's a real person? How could you resist a real person named John the Fearless? So why is John the Fearless not, why did you not write a book about him?
How much time do we have? I am almost, I fear, over-identified with the issue of not wanting to pretend I know the innermost thoughts and feelings and relationships of real people. Very early, I realized that although I didn't mind if other writers did this, I don't object if this is done. I like an awareness that there's an ethical component to writing fiction, that the people who have lived their lives, famous or obscure, have, for me, some right to not be taken and made use of for whatever purposes I want. That's one aspect of it, that by shifting it slightly from Byzantium to Sarantium, from Al-Andalus, Spain, medieval times, to Al-Rasan, from El Cid to Rodrigo Diaz, my similar but not identical character. From Francois Villon, the poet, to my Thierry Villon, I feel both liberated to invent, to give them the inner life, the sex life, the anxieties that seem to emerge from my thinking about them and writing about them, without superimposing those thoughts on a real person. And that's me. That's not, as an example, I gave Hilary Mantel's Cromwell trilogy the best reviews I've ever given any book in print, and I've reviewed over the years in many places, because I thought they were brilliant. I would never have written that way, but I thought they were brilliant, because she is entirely in the head of Thomas Cromwell, Henry VIII's advisor. She gives him, invents for him, an abusive, alcoholic father. We know nothing of Cromwell's father. He's not known to the historical record. She gives him that abusive, drunken father as a motivation for aspects of his personality. That's fine, that's what fiction writers do. But I always worry that, especially when a book is good, when the book is bad, it's easy to dismiss. When they're good, people will come away thinking, now I understand Thomas Cromwell. Now I know why Anne Boleyn had to be executed. Finally, it's clear to me. There was a novel by Joyce Carol Oates, superb, important writer, about Marilyn Monroe. Do you remember that? Well, she wrote a book about Marilyn Monroe. And this is when I was first starting to formulate my thinking about this, my first speech on the subject. And the Calgary Herald reviewed, no, I'm sorry, Calgary Herald did do it, but this was the New York Times, makes the story even better. New York Times reviewer actually said, you can look it up, at last we have the inner Marilyn as we've never had her before. And I remember, Bruce, I remember thinking, are you kidding me? We have Joyce Carol Oates's fantasy upon Marilyn Monroe, a fantasy by a gifted novelist, but we don't have the actual inner Marilyn as we've never had her before. And I started with that, formulating my own approach to how I wanted to address these issues of the past and real people and wanting it to be relevant to readers today. So that's one aspect. And as I say, we don't have all night, so I'm going to give one aspect. That's one of them.
I have a copy of Blonde. I've never read it. It's in a box somewhere. I'm glad you read. I was wondering what excerpt you would read, and I knew you would read something from the beginning. And I'm really glad you read Sylvie, section about Sylvie, because something I love about your books is how, I mean, Sylvie's like a secondary character, but even if the tertiary characters have backstories and you're always treated with such sensitivity, even if a character is only there for a couple of pages. There's empathy. You write about them with empathy and sympathy and depth and just a genuine respect for the characters, which I always enjoy. I hate it when a character is killed off and you don't know anything. It just seems being a tool of the author. It seems cruel somehow. So why are you so generous with
That's a great question.
Thank you.
This one I can even answer. Maybe. Respect for characters links to the first question you asked and to my answer. It's the idea of respecting the real lives behind my invented ones. And I'm not going to stop and not respect my invented ones. So I have been accused, for example, of playing fast and loose with your emotions by making you cry. I have jokingly, maybe less jokingly, said that on my tombstone will be written, he made people cry. But, and again, with a joke, a serious backbite. And this is the direct answer to Bruce's question. If you want people to be emotionally and intellectually engaged by the fate, by the lives, the doings, the interactions of people in a novel, you have to visualize them as completely as you can. And for me, that's not just the principal protagonist, but it's also secondary, what one might call marginal characters in the novel. Somebody once said, Kay never met a secondary character he didn't like. It's not true. I have disliked many of them. I've written a great many people I have loathed, but I get interested in them. That's the underlying point. I want to understand why they do loathsome things. I want to understand why other people in the book relate to each other in the ways they do. It's never been just a matter of offering a story. It's offering a story with people you might care about. And that second part for me is at least as important. It feeds the story, it feeds your response to the story you're reading. There's this weird, I know you've run into this, we've talked about this. There's a weird dichotomy thrown up between character-driven fiction and plot-driven fiction. And the character-driven is supposed to be literary fiction, and plot-driven is supposed to be commercial fiction. I don't get it. I see it. We all see it. But for me, it's our job to try to deliver both, to try to deliver characters that matter to you in a story that keeps you up at night. It's not easy, trust me, but that's the underlying aspiration, is to dovetail the two things in one book, or 16 books, and you keep going.
You'll get the hang of it. I have to, one thing about Guy's books is I cannot always remember the names of the characters, because sometimes the characters' names are from Guy's imagination. And I also don't always know.
That's what it's there for.
I know, I learned that from books. But also, I don't always know how to pronounce them. So there are several characters I'm not quite sure how to pronounce. But I wanted to ask you about, where's he hiding? Well, Guy Gavriel Kay.
Yeah.
Who's a very interesting character. It's they, I suppose, he, she, they. It is, I think the word I use is gender fluid. So I'll tell you a little bit of how, I've forgotten the character's name already.
I've explored aspects of this before. This was probably the most formally laid out delineation of it. Here's one thing you may not know, but in fact, all through history in many cultures, from the Plains Indian to the Siberian and Mongolian steppe, the idea that gender fluid figures, by way of their fluidity, their crossing between, their ambiguity, have more access to things that other people did not know, could not know. There has actually been, all through history, a presence of cultures that valued that aspect of their nature because they might be able to help the tribe, the community, the city, the country. The same way that monarchs all through history were, right up to Ronald Reagan, startlingly dependent on astrology for making decisions. This idea that the world was really difficult. We find it easy, of course, but that the world was really difficult, troubling, challenging, decisions that needed making were beyond us. And there might be some people who could help. And I'm not talking about the horoscope in the free press for Aquarius. The idea that there might be people who could be of assistance in understanding what lay behind the surface of the world. And as I say, in many cultures, one type of person, one set of people were the gender fluid. And so I wanted to work with that in this book for that reason, and also because it allowed me to have readers today grasp how people in the past deeply believed certain things that we may not. And we mustn't be smug and superior and complacent about how much more we know than people 700 years ago did. And one way as a writer that I can do that is by making what the society believed be true. So that as you read the book, you're reading about people who aren't foolish in their naive beliefs. You're reading about a world that it is the way the people in the story believe it to be. And if I do it right, that shrinks the distance between the 21st century reader and characters modeled on 14th and 15th century people. So that's two functions, if you will. Also, Dan, I got interested in him.
Fascinating character. I loved when that character showed up. Just must have been so much to write. It's just such a fun character. Maybe one last question from me. Let's see. There are lots of references or echoes in other books, other places in your book, like little Easter eggs. There's always a pleasure reading Guy's books when you think, I've read about this place. I know about this place. I know about your Italy. Again, I can't remember what it's called. Well, why do you have this world that connects with a lot of your other books? Maybe that's the way to put it.
He's being really courteous and careful to everybody who hasn't read the book, which is the way it should be, because not everybody is. You know, there's a great story by, this isn't an answer, but it's such a good story. There's in the autobiography of a Globe and Mail sports columnist, he talks about being a teenager and going to see Star Wars. And he had seen it in the first showing in Toronto, the stuff. And he sees this massive lineup along the street in Toronto. And a guy is driving along the street with the window rolled down, yelling as he goes by the line, "Darth Vader is Luke's father."
That was a spoiler.
I'm sorry if I spoiled it. You can come up and chastise me out. You know that, here's another story. In our family, my mother never let my brother live this down. That they were talking, I wasn't there, they were talking, my parents, my youngest brother, a friend of his, about something or other. And my mother, God bless her, my mother was wonderful, said, "That's very much like when Anna Karenina killed herself under the train." And my brother said, "Mom, you've spoiled it." She said, "That's Tolstoy, it's the 19th century, you're a university student. I cannot spoil that for you, I will not accept that." And I'm with her. So that actually relates to the question you're answering. I get that. I do get that. I want every book at this stage to stand by itself for a new reader who's never picked up one of my books, or for an existing reader who hasn't read one for 9 years and doesn't reread in order to start the new book. I want every book to be self-contained and an experience that matters by itself. At the same time, as I said at the lecture at the beginning, I hadn't thought how this tied in, but it does. I do feel an ongoing sense of gratitude for and appreciation of readers over 4 decades now. And one of the things I like to do to show that is offer what I call grace notes, but the cool kids today call Easter eggs. The idea that there are little bits in the books that if you have read earlier books, give you a call back to your own memories of other work. But if you haven't read the earlier books, you're not missing out on anything near central elements of the book you're reading. And that's how I try to use these callbacks, grace notes, Easter eggs. It's a kind of nod of appreciation to people who've read the earlier books without in any way impeding. And funnily enough, and I've had people tell me this, it works the other way too. If you read Written on the Dark first as one of my books, and then go back and read the Sarantine Mosaic or Lines of Elbasan or Children of Earth and Sky, those books will have grace notes and callbacks for this one. That you will have seen something in this book that is triggered by an association the other way. It can work in both directions, if I do it right. So that's one.
Thank you. I think we should read some questions.
Sure.
Just a hint, and then it pops up from behind the screen.
If one of these is boxers or briefs, it's not going to get it. Oh my God. Oh, aren't you guys great? Okay, what have we got?
Oh, yeah. No,
We got another one? Okay, good. We did talk a little bit about this. You absolutely love to torture your readers. How do you go about inflicting the most pain possible? I was trained by my younger brothers in Winnipeg. They needed keeping in line, so I learned how to do that. Seriously, it goes back to what I said already about trying to make people as vivid and intense for the reader, even secondary characters, so that if somebody dies, you have come to have feelings for them, as the kids say these days, that catch feelings, I think is the newer version of the phrase. I have young friends, I learn things. The idea of building as much depth and intensity into characters is what allows us to share an emotional response when very difficult or tragic things happen to them. I've always hated strong word, disliked books when somebody dies and all of their lifelong friends carry on with the next stage of the plot. And it happens all the time. That some words spoken, I'll never get over the loss of Marjorie. And then you're around the corner walking into a bar and trying to figure out who stole the papers from Frank's house. Marjorie's still in the street. I don't like when books are written that way. I prefer you to feel the intensity of the loss as you read the book. Or after, that it stays with you. That's even better. Is there a historical era or focus that you're excited by right now? The Edmonton Oilers. That's true. A dozen. My problem is that when I finish a book, it's not the problem, my work method, is that when I finish a book, I'm not holding out on you, I truly never know what I'm going to do next. And in some ways, I've learned it's better that I don't, because I want the last book to recede from me a little bit. I want the characters, the way they think, the way they speak, the landscape I've described, the language I've created. Because each book has slightly different tones of language, sometimes more than slightly. I need the last book to recede before I can even start thinking about what I'm going to do next. So there are many times and places that interest me. There is a catch, which is that it has to interest me for 3 or 4 years because I'm not fast. And there's going to be a long time in that time and place. If there's a character in the next book named McDavid, you will. Well, I'm going to mention this, but the answers are the same. Do you think you will ever revisit the Chinese flavored world of Under Heaven and River of Stars? Sure, I might. But I don't know if and when. I'm not sitting here planning that. What that question is more often phrased as, will you ever go back to Fianna? Will you ever write another book in Fianna? I gotta tell you something about you guys.
Well, now it's
Their
coming
mothers
in. You were so
have-
complimentary.
It's still a compliment. It's still a compliment.
Okay.
It has to do with what happens when we're in love with something. We want more of it, Bruce. It's still a compliment. We want more. There is a way in which consumers of art, film, painting, books, kind of say, do to me again what you did to me before. That the world is so uncertain, unpredictable, chancy, difficult. Sometimes what we really want from a novel is the comfort of the familiar space that we've been in before. There's an umbilical quality to it. And I get it because I can feel it. I want to give the comfort to readers that they're in good hands, that I won't cheat them, that the new book will carry as much interest, intensity, humor, drama as I can, if they like what I do. But I don't necessarily want to go back and revisit. And readers often do want that revisiting. It's just a balance. How much time do we have? How many more?
1 or 2.
Hmm?
I think 1 or 2.
1 or 2. Okay. That means I have to be selective. It's hard. Do you have any poetry or short stories published? And I do have a book of poetry. It's probably on sale here. So it's called Beyond This Dark House. It's published by Penguin. And there's a cute story about it, but I'm not going to tell another cute story.
Because you only have 2 questions left. So.
This is a comment to me, a personal one, so I'll save that. No, not boxes or beats. Same thing, what would you like to write about in history that you haven't written yet? It's the same question. This is interesting, this is actually it's a good question because it opens up interesting things. The question is, how much of your books come from unbidden ideas as opposed to curiosity about things that you've already read or seen? And it's really good because it gets to the creative process. It gets to how different people make art. So in my case, quite a lot comes and surprises me as I'm writing a book. Quite a lot of every book has literally had me typing away in the morning on my 3rd cup of coffee, and I'm banging and banging, banging, and I stop and say, who the hell is that? That's not a joke. I have said that. Somebody has walked in to the room where a character is, and I'm typing like crazy, and the new person says something, and I have to stop and let my conscious catch up with my subconscious that the book needed a new person asking a question of a protagonist at that moment. And then because I'm me, that new person, I need to know more about it. I don't like the Shakespearean idea of a messenger saying, Fortin bra, my lord, and then walking off. Who's that messenger? What do we know about him? What don't we know about him? So very often, once I've started and the book is beginning to unfold itself, there will be not just plot points, but new themes, additional motifs, that come into the book once I'm in the middle of it. The characters and the setting start to generate things that I didn't have in mind when I started. That's why I love the question, because it does speak to how some people write. Other people block everything. I have friends who can't begin writing word one until they've outlined to the end of the book in some degree. That's what works for them. That's how they produce their art. So the answer to your question is purely about me. It's purely about my method. In no way for those of you who are aspiring writers or existing writers. Advice. I'm reluctant to give advice, as I said before, because it's so personal. And I think the idea of the personal relationship between the author and their readers is where we'll stop and shift to, I'm not going away. I'll be signing books if you like. I will sign, Daniel brought this up, I will sign older books for you, not just the new ones. My one request is that if you're generous enough and strong enough to have brought lots of them, as a courtesy to the other people here, you wait and I'll sign whatever you bring if you can wait, and let everyone who's come and just wants the new book signed in the lineup. That would be a courtesy, and Winnipeggers are always courteous. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
So much. And a couple things before we move to the signing portion. The last thing to cover is just give us a quick moment to make our ways over to the signing table. It's going to be found to the left of the cash desk. You can have a book signed before you pay for it. Just make sure you don't leave without paying for it. And yeah, we've already covered that last bit there as well. Thank you so much again. Thanks again to all of you for joining us today in person, to those online, to Bruce for generously hosting, to Viking Publishing again for making this evening a reality, and again to Guy Gavriel Kay. Thank you so much.